Halliwell, podcast 4, moving forward from a solid foundation on guitar. Broadcasting to you in the middle of the street about 11:30 at night. And yes, I look weird. To be honest, the police just stopped me. So I was just about to record. The police stopped me because I'm shouting to myself with a dictaphone in my hand. And they asked me a lot of questions about, what am I doing? I said, recording a podcast. I showed them my little podcast notes. And we had a little 30-second conversation. And in the end, I just told the police, listen to my podcast, go on iTunes and listen to it while you have your night adventures. They chuckled and drove off. So I've got a good feeling this will be a good podcast. So thanks for tuning in. And this podcast is now on iTunes, which is marvelous. It's been approved by Apple, so thank you, Apple. And so I'm going to have a podcast every single week coming at you, talking about guitar, talking about the struggles, talking about starting guitar, beginners, practice routines, intermediates, advanced techniques, all of that stuff. Which brings us on to the topic of today, which is, after you've learned the 5 fundamentals of guitar, where do you go from there? Just to recap, so last podcast was about the 90-10, focusing 90% of your time or practice time on skills and 10% on songs. This week is about what do you do after you've learned the 5 fundamentals of guitar, after you've got a solid foundation on guitar. A lot of people start getting stuck. So this is what that podcast's about. The 5 fundamentals of guitar, just to recap from last podcast, is picking chords, arpeggio, scales and strumming. Typically it takes 8 to 12 weeks of consistent practice to get this to get these 5 fundamentals down, so they're automated, so you don't have to think as much about them, because then once you've got that solid foundation you can start to build upon it, and that's what we're going to be speaking about right now. I have some people who have been messaging me about theory, about what to practice, how to become the best guitar player you can be. That's a deep question, but what we're going to do is go over, after the 5 fundamentals, what should you focus on next? And then at the end of the podcast, I'll finish it off with some practical advice about, if you're a bit more advanced, then the next step after the 5 fundamentals, what can you practice? How can you structure your practicing routines? And what should you focus on? Anyway, so let's dive straight into it. After you learn your 5 fundamentals, I always tell my students we do 2 weeks of playing songs. Yes, songs. I've been getting quite a bit of hate with people, not so much beginners, for some reason advanced guitar players and some intermediate guitar players have been hating the idea that you should practice skills first and then songs. There's a lot of people saying about just play songs from the start, and as I explained last week, playing songs from the start is just real hard for a complete beginner, and it's way more efficient to learn the skills first. So I don't need to speak about that anymore, because you can go and listen to last week's podcast. Now, the step after learning the 5 fundamentals is learning some songs. So with my students, what we do is usually a couple of their favourite songs. You type in that song, you type in chords, you look at what chords they use, you listen to the song to hear the chord changes, and as long as it's not like a, heavy metal song, an Iron Maiden song, a complete rock song or anything like that, generally it's fine. Generally, most beginner guitarists can actually learn it after they've learned the 5 fundamentals, of course. So after we've done those 2 weeks of playing songs, because you need, as a musician, you need to learn how to play songs, how to transition from verse to chorus to solo to bridge, etc. After we go back to kind of skills again, and that's really the next level in terms of skills, but it's not under the 5 fundamentals again. Of course, what you need to do is, I don't know, there's people shouting. So after you've learnt your songs, the couple of songs that you've picked, the next step is, it's going to be building the strength in your fingers to do bar chords. That's an essential part of playing guitar, is to play bar chords. If you don't know what a bar chord is, it's where you basically put one finger across the whole one fret of the guitar, but across multiple strings. So, for example, to play a bar chord, to say an F, you put that first finger across all 6 strings on the first fret and put some other notes down and you get an F chord. Now, for complete beginners again, it is silly to start out on bar chords, and most beginners can't do it. So we need to build that strength. And how I do that is the spider. I don't know if you're familiar with the spider, but it's that exercise that a lot of people on YouTube talk about, where you do one finger per fret across all 6 strings. And yeah, most beginners, you want to start on about 70 beats per minute. So that's going to be your warm-up. Okay, so 5 minutes on that. Focusing on quality of note, not how fast. Okay, I'm not bothered about, how fast you can go. Now, after learning the spider, what I get into with my students is power chords. So yes, it's a bit rock, it's a bit metal, but I think for all guitar players it's useful to learn power chords, as it starts to develop your stretching. A lot of people struggle with that stretch because there's one fret in between. It's like a 1 fret stretch. So you got your first finger, let's say a C power chord. Your first finger will be on the A string 3rd fret, and your 3rd finger will be on the 5th string, 5th fret, D string. Yeah, getting my words muddled up. Right, so once you learn those power chords, that will give you a lot of stretch. And then the next step from there is sliding those power chords across the neck and on different strings. A great song to learn is Iron Man for that. And I've got a video on YouTube that you can watch to learn Iron Man. It's a great beginner song after the 5 fundamentals. So we've warmed up with the spider, and then we've moved on to power chords. And remember, this is all in the same lesson. I don't like the linear kind of growth, if that makes sense. I don't like doing one thing, then the next thing, then the next thing, then the next thing. What I like to do is hit multiple important areas and grow them all together, because they all help each other. A perfect example is the 5 fundamentals of guitar. It's not like I'm doing, right, master your picking first, then move on to chords, then move on to arpeggios. What we're going to do is we're doing picking, chords, arpeggio, scales and strumming at a basic level, and then increasing the skill. And that's exactly the same which I'm going to be doing here, but this is more about developing your finger strength and developing your theory knowledge, but we'll come on to that in a minute. So we got the spider down, then we're going to do some power chords. The next step after that is, well, on the same lesson after that, is learning theory. And this is where guitarists get very confused. This is when a lot of, especially self-taught guitarists, don't learn, and they can play guitar really well. But they struggle with the theory stuff. So what's hard for them is they don't really know how chords are put together. They don't know what chords fit with what. They don't know what scales fit with what chords. And obviously from a creativity point of view, that is quite hard. Yes, you can use your ear, but at the end of the day, if you learn your theory, you then can get to the sound in your head in the shortest amount of time. And that's why we learn theory. People obsess over theory. There's this whole division between guitarists about, you've got the guys who are theory specialists, like jazz guitarists, classical guitarists, and they're like, theory is the must, it's the way to go. And I agree with them. If you learn theory, there's no harm in it, and it's hugely beneficial for your playing. But then you've got these other guys who go against theory, who say, you know what, you don't need to learn theory, you don't need to learn skills, you just need to there was this guy on this forum today messaging me about that you don't need to learn skills and you don't need to do theory. I can't remember how he put it. Oh, he said that you need to just what he said was guitar is an art, and instead of learning theory, instead of learning skills, what you need to do is just express yourself. Now, I have a huge issue with people giving that type of advice to beginners. Beginners who have no skills or have very little skill. And if you're telling the beginner guitarist, don't worry about theory, don't worry about skills, just, use your creativity, just, guitar's an art at the end of the day, and just express yourself, express how you feel on that guitar. I think that's useless advice for the complete beginner, and useless advice for most people, to be honest. So, I kind of came off the forum after that, because I thought, I'll get through to these people eventually through YouTube videos and podcasts, but I'm not going to waste my time on debating one-on-one with a person like that. And a point I just want to add is, of course, once you get skills and once you have skills and theory knowledge, and it's basically subconscious, so it's inside you to a point where you don't need to think about it. Like, I just know, if I think of A, I know that the third is C sharp and the fifth is E, and I can visualize it on the guitar, and it's all connected. So once you're like that, then you can forget about theory, and you can forget about techniques and everything like that, because you have the skills, you have the techniques, and you have the theory knowledge. You can forget about all of that and just go for creativity and just basically listen to the notes that are playing in your head, or the music that's playing in your head. So you can do that, but telling a complete beginner that is just like poetry. Now, poetry is considered as an art, just like guitar playing, considered as an art. However, with poetry, you still need the skill before you can get to the art. For example, if let's say I'm English, I am English, a language I can't speak is French, right? So if someone asked me to use my creativity and write a poem in French, no matter how much feeling I have, there's no way I can write a poem in French or express myself in French, because I don't have the skills to speak French. So it's the same with guitar. If you don't have the skills to play guitar, you don't understand guitar, then how can you use creativity with guitar? Anyway, that's for another podcast, but I'm very passionate about that topic. So I'm losing track, and I do that a lot. Where was I? Right, so we've learned our power chords. What we're going to do is basic theory on that first lesson. So what we're going to do is learn the notes on the fretboard. Yes, that's extremely important after you've learned the 5 fundamentals, is to start learning, okay, this is E, this is F sharp, this is G. Okay, and I always tell my students, learn from fret 0 to fret 5. Again, just warm up, just for 10 minutes a day, do, open E, then F sharp, G sharp, A, next string, A sharp, B, C sharp, D, etc, etc. After that, that's usually the first lesson. So the first lesson is usually Spider with some power chords, with learning notes on the neck. But after that, what you want to learn is your hammer-ons and pull-offs. Hammer-ons, pull-offs, trills, and then bending. Not all in the same lesson, that's divided into a couple of weeks. For pull-offs, the best song to learn is Thunderstruck by AC/DC. Of course, AC/DC, Angus Young, he picks it all. On the video, he does it does look like he's pulling everything off, but that's just for show. When you actually listen to it, you can hear the picking every note. So what we're going to do is practice our pull-offs by using Thunderstruck. Other great things is Sultans of Swing by Dire Straits. You can practice your pull-offs. At the end there's a little solo and it goes billada, 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 if you know that part. So that's another great way to practice your pull-offs. As for hammer-ons, there's a song called Tribute by Tenacious D. That's a great way to practice some hammer-ons onto open chords. But generally how I teach hammer-ons as well is just by going up the pentatonic scale using hammer-ons. Anyway, so that's all the techniques kind of you need to learn after learning the 5 fundamentals. Let me recap them just in case you got a bit confused. So we want to do the Spider every day. Warm up with that. It's really important for your picking hand and for your left hand. Coordination and strength. Then you want to go onto power chords to get that stretch started. You might not be able to do it straight away, but just keep on it every single day. Then what you want to be doing is every day refreshing your memory on the notes of guitar, so you can start looking at the guitar and thinking about notes instead of string number and fret number. Obviously, with the theory stuff, I do take my students on like this little theory course where they learn the notes on the fretboard, then they learn the major scale, so the formula of the major scale, tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. Then they apply that to guitar and do it on one string. Then they learn how to create a chord, the formulas of chords and things like that. That's all very important stuff. What a lot of self-taught players do when you don't have structure or you don't have a quote-unquote teacher or a guide or something like that, tend to just play guitar a lot, which is great, but then the theory stuff they don't really get and they don't understand, and that will limit your playing. Obviously, after learning the pull-offs, after learning bending, take a couple of solos. A great solo to start on is Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen. Not playing it at the speed Brian May does, but it's great practice for bending. And it has a couple of hammer-ons and pull-offs as well. Okay, so after you've done all of that, the next step goes to bar chords. We start with our 2-string bar, then we go to our 3-string bar, and then we go to our 4-string bar. And that's practicing the major shape, the minor shape, and then what you want to do is combine the major and minors bar chords in the sequence of the major scale. So you're playing the chords of the major scale using bar chords. That takes a little time, maybe 1 month. You can start with drop D power chords as well, barring first finger. I've got a video on that. So yeah, that's all the steps after learning the 5 fundamentals, or very briefly. I just wanted to go one step further in this podcast. We're almost out of time, but let's do it anyway. And to end on some practical advice, there's a certain guitar player who has been messaging me. He's doing an incredible job of, I think he said he's been playing for 9 months and he's practiced pretty much every day, which, congratulations to him, that's incredible. He asked me a question about, how do you get to the next level of guitar playing? So obviously when you're stuck and you feel like, okay, you've reached your goal, which was to play this or play a power chord. It happens so many times in our guitar playing journey, is what do you do when you're stuck? So I just want to answer his question and give him some practical advice on that. And what he wants to do, this is a guy who knows how to do bar chords, knows how to do the 5 fundamentals and what I spoke about after the 5 fundamentals. I don't think he has the theory knowledge, but I know he's going to work on sorting that out. So this is what he should be doing. He should have a practice routine of 4 things. It should be technique is 1, theory is another, songs is another, and fretboard knowledge is another one, or fretboard knowledge / harmony, as they're pretty much the same. You want to divide your time quite evenly. You can do maybe a bit of less theory and a bit more on the songs, but you want it quite even, maybe 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes. For the technique, you want to be practicing your picking. That's with your right hand, trying to get a bit faster every day. With your left hand, you want to be practicing what we call legato, which is basically hammer-ons and pull-offs, but going up a scale in a smooth way. So going up in hammer-ons and coming back down in pull-offs. That's a very foundational part of your technique. Then we've got other techniques, obviously, like bending, which you would need to practice. Make sure the bending is accurate. So if you're bending up 2 frets higher, you want to make sure you're hitting the note dead on and not too flat or not too sharp. And you want to practice your palm muting. It's a bit underrated, but it's definitely an incredible technique to have. So I would spend some time on palm muting as well. Obviously, you're not going to do all that in one day. You would pick 2 a day, or maybe even just 1 a day. Okay, so that's picking, legato, bending, and palm muting. That covers the essentials of technique. As for theory, what you want to be practicing or really learning is you want to be learning the notes on your fretboard. Okay, that's the number 1 key. Then the next step is you want to learn the formula of a major scale. So that would be, learning tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone, learning how to put a note at the start and how to follow that formula and get to a major scale. If you're talking about G, you're gonna put the G, go a tone higher, you get to A, tone higher, you get to B, semitone higher is C, tone higher is D, tone higher is E, tone higher is F sharp. So the G major scale having 1 F sharp, or 1 sharp. So that's for your theory stuff. Also for your theory stuff, you want to be learning the formulas of different chords. First start out with triads, which is chords with 3 notes, root, 3rd and 5th. Then go on to major 7ths, dominant 7ths, and sus2, sus4, and the more kind of complex ones. And chord progressions. You want to learn what chords, first of all, are in the major scale, and what chord progressions sound great, and what are the common chord progressions in common pop songs. Then fretboard knowledge. Basically, it's basically applying that theory knowledge that you know intellectually to the fretboard. So you'll go over your pentatonic patterns from shape 1 to shape 5. You'll go over your major pentatonics. You'll go over your major scale and try and get all 7 shapes. What else would you do? Yeah, so you'll be doing your pentatonics, major scale, pentatonic minor, basically the major scale in the 7 shapes, also known as 7 modes, but don't get confused by that word mode yet. And you'll be learning chords, different shapes of the same chord. For example, I can play a G major on the 3rd fret. In the open position, I can also play a G major bar in the 3rd fret. I can also play a G major with a D shape, with a C shape. That's called the cage system. That would be for another podcast, but just be aware of it. And then the last thing is songs. So pick one song a week, study it in terms of the components that song has. So first of all, break it down into rhythm and lead. So the rhythm generally goes with the bass, and generally the skills and techniques you'll use with rhythm would be chords, palm muting. You'll be using power chords if it's a rock song, arpeggios. So make sure you break that song down into the rhythm components, and then of course the lead components. So that's where you'll be using your scales, your bending, pull-offs, hammer-ons, legato picking, all that stuff. So yeah, that's what I would practice. Those 4 things: technique, theory, songs, and fretboard knowledge. Yeah, we're slightly over the time, but there was a lot to get through, and I'm glad we got through it all. So if you're listening to this on YouTube, just to let you know, you can go over to iTunes and download this podcast and also subscribe. And so yeah, next week I'll be back, catch ya with another podcast. Until then, keep rocking out.